So we're talking about the Tamid Shel Shachar when it's offered. Okay. So we mentioned this idea that Tamid Shel Shachar, when it was brought in the morning, and it's the basis for the idea that there's a Sof Zman Tefillah in the morning. Tamid Shel Bin Arbayim Shochatino Tho Mishayari Chatzil Yukar Lachol means recognized to everybody that what? Sheharich. So that means, when does your shadow start to get longer? It keeps getting shorter and shorter as the day gets longer, as the sun gets higher in the sky. Then once the sun gets to its highest point for that particular day, it then starts to go down. So your shadow starts to get longer. So it takes a while to actually notice this significantly, that your shadow gets longer. And that they call that Mincha Gedola. It's from 6.5 hours of the day and on. Ad Sofayom, until the end of the day. And we saw the Rambam many times, end of the day means sundown. Especially in the temple, where the Rambam says explicitly, everything is done at sundown. All the blood is puzzle at sundown. Anything that doesn't make it into sundown, that's it. Really, they would only be slaughtering this animal at 8.5 hours of the day. It's actually put on the altar at 9.5 hours of the day, which means that they spent an hour from the slaughtering. What else they got to do? Well, they got to catch the blood, which is pretty quick, and put the blood on the altar as a burnt offering. Fine, they could do that. Then where the next stages we saw they have to do, if it's a burnt offering of a lamb, they have to skin it and take out the entrails, and they have to cut it into different parts and put the parts sometimes in bowls, like the entrails are put in a bowl. Some things just give it to the Kohanim to take. They make a whole parade, and I'm sure it would take less than an hour to do this, but they got everything ready. They wash things. They have to wash things that are dirty, right? So it takes about an hour. And at 9.5 hours of the day, if the day started if the sun rose at 6 and sets at 6, from 6 to 6, 8.5 hours of the day would be at 2:30 in the afternoon. That's when they slaughter it. And the karev part, when they put it on the fire, would be at 3:30 in the afternoon. That's what it means. So we mentioned that there's a verse, and the Mishneh seemed to say that this started with Matan Torah. Yeah, we did mention that. Okay. And what do they do here? We have a question. You know that the Goyim used to do animal sacrifice also, right? All sorts of nations practiced some sort of thing. Obviously, there's a world of difference between pagan sacrifice and proper Jewish sacrifice. When did the Goyim stop doing this? Did the Goyim ever stop? You say no. I grew up in America. I never saw. I think
Christianity stopped.
There's something in Christianity, because it turns out in the Muslim world, the Muslims don't have a base of Mikdash. They have certain so-called holy places, and they took over our holy place. But they have not built altars. They don't have a priesthood. They don't have, at least a classical sense, but they still do have certain practices that are reminiscent of sacrifice. They call it that. On their holidays, they have ritual slaughter of goats or even camels, cattle, for consumption purposes, and they do acts that they call sacrificial in nature. They do this type of thing, and they do have the blood run certain things. When they greet also VIPs and all that, they have special ritual slaughters. So the Muslims still have a certain concept. In the East, there's still forms of sacrifice. And it turns out even in Greece, where they're Christian, by the way, they still have something called the Qurbanion. And by that way, it comes from the Arabic word Qurban, which is just the Hebrew word Korban, means a sacrifice. So they still have types of things, even though they do not have temples where they do this. They do it outside. They do it on holidays, feast days, outside in the field or whatever it is. There are even some churches where they bring an animal, and as part of the holiday feast, they slaughter it. But generally speaking, yes, it's true. What happened in the Roman world? The Greeks practiced sacrifice to their gods, right? They used to use pigs. And the Romans also. That was a terrible thing. The Romans had a whole pantheon, just like the Greeks did. So the Romans had temples where they did this. The Christians put a stop to this. Christianity took over the Roman Empire. Why would Christianity be opposed to sacrifice? It's a Jewish thing, isn't it? Didn't it come from Judaism? What happened?
But they replaced all the sacrifices with just one.
Yeah, they said Big JC himself was the final sacrifice. Okay, that's who it was. Until that point, don't forget, when was he? What was he killed? The last thing he did, he attended Korban Pesach. Okay, fact, at least fact the way they interpret history. The last thing he did was attend Korban Pesach, where everybody bought lambs, and then he had a big seder with all his, I guess, his closest homies. At which point he told them, here, everybody take some arbakosos and some matzah, and turn it into a new ritual. And his sacrifice was the sacrifice. So that was a Christian idea. You can understand why the early church fathers had such a hatred for the very idea that Jews would have the chutzpah to try to rebuild the temple. It used to be the Babylonians destroyed the temple because that's what you do when you conquer, destroy. But then later conquerors of the Babylonians gave permission to the Jews to rebuild the temple, right? And what did Cyrus say in part of his proclamation of rebuilding the temple? He's sponsoring a lot of it because he wants the Jewish people to offer sacrifice on behalf of the king and his sons. That's what they used to do. God had chosen him. Yes, in one of the subsequent letters brought in Sefer Ezra, in Aramaic, it has the king's orders that they offer sacrifice on his behalf also, for him, for the good of him and his sons. And by the way, this policy continued for how long? That the Gentile ruler, whoever was the conqueror of Eretz Yisrael, what did he do? He sponsored sacrifices in the temple on his own behalf. The Roman emperors, right before the destruction, were doing this minhag still, right? That's what Bar Kamsa got in the way of. It was a usual thing for the Roman emperor to send a sacrifice to the Jerusalem temple on his own behalf and expected the Jewish priests to offer it for him, right? And Bar Kamsa, what did he do? He put a blemish in there that the Romans wouldn't recognize as anything wrong with the korban, but would make the rabbis in charge of the temple refuse such a korban, right? It was a provocation, basically. Remember? So Rabbi Zechariah ben Kulas was the one who stood up for the halacha that says, we're not going to change the halacha here just to find favor with the emperor. Otherwise, people will think the wrong thing about the standards of Tamimus. And we're not going to put Bar Kamsa to death because then people will think that he was being put to death for the sin of offering bad sacrifice, for which there is no death penalty. So they're basically stuck, right? Really, they should have been pragmatic and just done it because of Pikuach Nefesh. They should have offered the sacrifice because of Pikuach Nefesh. Pikuach Nefesh is Doche Shabbos. Pikuach Nefesh is Doche Tmimus. Something like that.
Wasn't there a statement in the Talmud that says
yeah, that's what he's saying. They should not have let him win the argument. They should have said, we're going to go through with this because if we provoke the emperor, we're all dead and the temple's gone. That's what they should have done. And they realized it after the fact. Hindsight is 2020. My point is, the Romans, up until the time of the Korban, did not see animal sacrifice as anything against their culture. They saw it as, we offer sacrifice to our gods, our pantheon, and we have temples in Rome and other places, and the Jews have their god and their temple also. The Christians put an end to this. So I'm asking something that we should consider. The Jewish attitude towards sacrifice. There are many Jews who jump on the Rambam's idea that sacrifice itself is just an allowance, a concession to the primitive Yetzer Hara to offer animal sacrifice, which all men had once upon a time, which was a universal custom, just like people build houses of worship. We don't say it's chukas agayim for us to build ourselves a house of worship. Gentiles do that. That seems to be a universal human thing. Just like I pointed out to someone asked a girl wearing a white dress at her wedding, a wedding dress for a kala, right? Or the idea of a canopy, and that the bride and groom proceed to the canopy and get married under a canopy, and they wear fancy clothing at a wedding. Isn't that chukas agayim? And the answer, they might have gotten this from us. It is human. Okay, marriage also. The Rambam says we do achnasas kala for goyim and bikur kolim and havayas ameis because of darkei shalom. Why? Because there are certain aspects of human culture which are universal, and that is marriage, or at least it used to be. Goyim recognize this, and unfortunately, nichum avelim is something that they recognize. So if we have a wedding dress, that's just a human thing. So too, building a house of worship is a human thing. Well, no, the fact that the collars wear white, fancy white, for their wedding is an old Jewish thing. When? Because that's what we used to do to show that anybody had been in a state of purity in their VIP. They wear white robes. That's a Jewish thing. Okay, so first time, if you're the kala of something, the Rambam says they used to, and others they describe the way They treat the wife. They dress her up like a collar. Okay, the prime wife that they used to have before Dora Mabu, during Dora Mabu, was one wife is there, to be a carries a bias and produce children, and the other one's given privilege. They keep her on birth control, so they keep her like a collar, dressed up and all that. It is an old thing, and the Egyptians have this. The bride is honored. They dress her up like a queen, and they give her fancy robes. And because she's been to mikveh, they dress her in white. Yeah, it's very old. Okay, and what is it? They used to wear white also when they look for shidduchim. What they do, they have the dances and the krumim, right? So white was the color. Okay, white is usually the color, and people who are cleansed of sin wear white. So it says, why does the chassan wear a kittel on at the wedding? Was someone who's getting married, his sins are forgiven, right? So that's an old Jewish custom. The fact that Jews wear white at weddings is a very old thing. By the way, my point is that Christianity did away with animal sacrifice. So the Rambam talks about the concession. Many people, unfortunately, come out away from reading the Rambam saying, you know what, we don't want to go back to animal sacrifice. Perhaps this is something we should pray for. There are people who said this explicitly. There's a well-known heretic in the American West who calls himself an Orthodox rabbi, and therefore I'll homosexuality and all the rest of everything that's wrong. So he wrote a thing, I'm praying that the temple not be restored. I don't want to have animal sacrifice. I don't think enough people realize how much this is a Christian idea. If you had been in the East your entire life, you wouldn't have been affected by this. And you realize that going back to animal sacrifice is saying that we pray for. We've always been prayed for it. Even the Rambam says, yeah, it might have been a concession, but what are the halachas that the Rambam say? We're reading this right now. The Rambam's describing how to put a temple back in operation and have animal sacrifice. So the squeamishness we have with regards to animal sacrifice, like many other things, is a learned part of culture from Christianity. So we were growing up in the Western world for so long. That's why this idea sounds palatable to us. But really, we should, break out of these ideas. Just like with regards to war, people think, oh, we can't do that; it's unethical, and collateral damage, innocent civilians. You're talking like a Christian. You just don't realize it. If you had a healthy, purely Jewish attitude, you hadn't been exposed to the foreign ones, you'd realize, like Moshe Rabbeinu, sometimes you just have to kill your enemy. And if your enemy has no regard for the welfare of his children, of his wife, then you shouldn't either. Just a food for thought. Yeah, so it's Christianity that did away with animal sacrifice. Let's continue here. Why we wait 2 hours? That's what we saw with Korban Pesach. Because you need time for other korbanos that day. Like what? Because you're not allowed to offer any sacrifice before the morning lamb. And you also can't slaughter anything after the Tamid, the afternoon sacrifice. Except for Korban Pesach, where you don't have 2 hours to do it. Korban Pesach, it starts at 12:30, and if you say the Tamid's at 2:30, that gives you exactly 2 hours from Korban Pesach. We saw the Rambam said this in more detail in Hilchot Korban Pesach. Well, so 2 hours isn't enough? No, because you also have to clean up afterwards. The way the Rambam has it, if you did it according to the schedule we're about to see, then it actually gives 2 hours for Korban Pesach itself, and then there's the cleanup, which also takes some time. So you wouldn't have time to do that if you did it in this order. Wait a minute. So how don't you need a scriptural reference to allow for Korban Pesach to be after the Tamid? Alel hashleim kol korbanot kulam. The last thing has to be the Korban Tamid in the afternoon. So how can you do Korban Pesach afterwards? I understand, technically speaking, you need to, but are you allowed to? And the answer is there's a drasha. When's the time for the afternoon Tamid? It says Bein Har-Bayim. When's the time for Pesach? Bein Har-Bayim, the same time. They have the same defined time. Yeah, but Pesach also says Ba'erev. And Ba'erev is toward the evening. So they learned from that in Yerushalmi that Korban Pesach Dafka can be after the Korban Tamid. It's an exception. Good. Ein Shochatin at the Pesach. Ella achar tamid shalosh bein arbaim, and we don't slaughter Korban Pesach except after the tamid. That's what we do in Erev Pesach. V'chein mechusarei kippurim makrivin kaparatan achar tamid shalosh bein arbaim. Anybody who's a mechusar kippurim. What's a mechusar kippurim? Someone who not completely tahor, and he can only start eating of sacrifices once he does an elaborate ritual to purify himself. This is the Oledet, the Zav, the Zava, the Mitzorah, and the Ger is like them, but he's not exactly like them. All these people have to bring some sort of korban in order to be able to complete the purity. So he said, all those women who've given birth, they have to make sure to at least give the Kohanim enough money to bring a corresponding number of pair of birds to atone for all their births. Right? A woman had 4 kids, 4 pregnancies, 4 children. So before Passover, she has to bring 4 pairs of birds so that she can eat Korban Pesach. Make sense? Good. Do this. Well,
in the previous halacha, is there anything to be learned out from the fact that Rambam says it's asur kriv korban klal kodem tamid shachar, and then he doesn't use the exact same language when he's talking about.
Yes. Yes. This is lechatchila, but not iser. Very good deal.
Thank you.
And he says here, why? V'yomar ba'asar, they bring this on the 14th of Nisan, kadeshu to arin lechol pischem la'erev, so that they could be completely pure and eat their korban pesach in the evening. I do not know why the outer door and the main door are open. It's like the air conditioner and the outside are fighting, but they do that. You can feel thermodynamics. I was in the kitchen earlier today. The kitchen there. It's 2 rooms removed. Suddenly I feel a blast of cool air flowing through. Where's this cool air coming from? The base medrash. If you feel the air conditioning coming from 2 rooms away, it means the air conditioner is working really hard. Just to know, it's almost a waste of things, But whatever, people don't realize the air conditioning uses electricity, and if you leave the door or the window open, the air conditioner works a lot harder. That's why you realize you have 4,000 shekel electricity bill. You know where that comes from. Okay, you guys don't pay the electricity bills yet? No, you've never seen one. Well, they could be astronomical. Okay, there are people. I know people get this you turn on the air conditioner and they just let the windows open. Everybody pays a fortune during the summer. Erev Pesachim, Bein B'chol, Bein B'Shabbos, Hayat Tamid Nishchat B'Shevu Mechza. So how this work? On Erev Pesach, whether it's Shabbos or a weekday, they would slaughter the Tamid an hour earlier at 1:30 in the afternoon. The Karev Yishmon Umechza, and they put on Mizbeach at 8:30 in the afternoon. 2:30 in the afternoon. 8.5 hours of the day. Kedei sheyeh lahem pnai lishchot pischayim, so that they'd have time to offer Korban Pesach also. And if Erev Pesach was actually Erev Shabbos, they need more time, so they would make this even earlier at 12.5 hours. They would do the Tamid first at 12.5 hours, slaughter it then, Karev V'Shevu Mechza, and then offer it on the Mizbeach at 1:30 in the afternoon. Because now that they have to finish up the whole service of the Korban Pesach, they need time to roast it before Shabbos. Normally, the night of Passover is, if it's not Leil Shabbos, then you could roast the Korban Pesach then. And you could be late with your Seder. I know it's better as reason makdim mitzvahs, but you could roast meat whether on the night of Passover, and if it was a regular day before Passover, you could start roasting the meat even then. But when Erev Pesach is Erev Shabbos, you can only roast the meat on Erev Shabbos. Leil Pesach, you can't do any cooking. It's not just Yom Tov, it's Shabbos. So you cannot roast your meat then. So you have to make sure, give people enough time to finish roasting the Korban Pesach by the time Shabbos starts. So when Shabbos starts, it's sundown, so you need to give them another hour. That includes the Kohanim. They're basically, the way the Rambam describes it, they're Kohanim who are working in the temple up until the last minute on Erev Pesach, cleaning up. How do they get ready for Pesach? They have families. The Kohanim who are on duty know that the rest of the people in their Chavura are taking care of Korban Pesach for them. But when it's Erev Shabbos, everybody's got to make sure to roast their Pesach. There's nothing you can leave for the last minute. Okay. Even though we do not slaughter anything after the afternoon tamid, maktirin kol davar hara'ui lahaktara kol hayom. That which we can burn on the altar, we can continue burning. Slaughter is the first stage. Every korban has to be slaughtered. Some have to have kmitza done to them. But once we're talking about things that just need to be put on the fire, that you could do the entire day. Umaktrin Ivrei Oloth Wamirin Al Chatzil Laila Kamosha B'Yarnu B'Aseh Korbanot. You can continue even until halfway through the night. Remember L'Chatchila, like we saw last week, a mitzvah to do. Make sure to do it by midnight. But that's what they would do in the base of Mikdash. There were sometimes on a busy day, there was a lot of pieces of korbanot that had yet to be even put on the fire by the time sundown showed up. Okay. If you have limbs or entrails that had not been consumed by the fire, whether from the tamid or from other sacrifices, they're already on the fire. But sometimes you need to stoke the fire. Sometimes you need to flip things around, take a stick. There's always some kid who's in charge of the beer chametz. He's playing with fire, and there's a pile of chametz there. It's not burning evenly, right? Some pieces of bread, are too much at the edge, so you have to flip them over, get them closer to the fire, make sure it burns nice and evenly. So that's what he's describing here. They do this all night. Shneimar kol halayla ad boker. It says the H was burning kol halayla ad boker. It's even burning korbanos until then. What's the device that says the Kohanim used? A mazleg, for example, or tzinor. Various words they use to these metal items that the Kohanim would use to make sure that everything's burning nice and evenly. Well, what was that? Yeah, so we said, why not just delay the Talmud so it's time for Pesach? We did the math before Pesach, and so we saw these halachas. Just make sure we're not skipping anything. Oh, good. So let's see last halacha. Evarim shel tamid dochin et hatuma. Burning these limbs of the tamid, push aside tuma. That means that everybody's tameh. We still go ahead with this. Remember, that's why we could even do the temple services on a day like today. We're non dochin et Shabbat, but burning the leftover pieces of the tamid do not override the Sabbath. When Sabbath comes in, they don't do this. They make sure to finish burning the tamid on Erev Shabbos. Elav Erev Shabbos bilvad, maktirin evrei tamid shel Erev Shabbos. It's only on Erev Shabbos that we finish burning the tamid of Erev Shabbos. Friday's sacrifice has to make sure it's all burnt beforehand. Shel tamid techilato docha Shabbat. The beginning of the korban tamid overrides the Sabbath. With sofo a no docha. But the end of the burning does not. So, sorry, the end of the sacrifice is the actual act of burning. So what they would do is, if it's Erev Shabbos in the temple, I'm sure the Kohanim also, they have to make Shabbos. So I guess they would ask people to minimize the korbanos they're bringing on Erev Shabbos. Why? Because they won't have the leeway of burning all the leftovers overnight. Shabbos comes, the temple's closed. No burning hector chalavim, as it's called in the Shabbos. Chavei Shabbos craving b'leil Yom Tov. If you have the chalavim of Shabbos, that means all the leftovers from a Shabbos day's korbanos, and now Motzei Shabbos is Yontif, so you can continue burning them on Yontif that night. If Yontif is Motzei Shabbos, we can't burn them on Yom Kippurim. Why? It says Olah Shabbat b'Shabbato. The Olah of Shabbos is burned on Shabbos, but not on another Shabbos. When would this happen? When Shabbos was Erev Yom Kippur. Does it happen anymore? No. The sages play with our calendar such that it's designed that Yom Kippur not fall out when? Motzei Shabbos. They say there are reasons that, in case people die, there would be other, that would be pretty bad. They had no refrigeration back then. You have 2 straight days where you couldn't bury anybody. So, yeah. So it says one Shabbos, and Yom Kippur is a type of Shabbos, by the way. Lo Shabbat acheret, lo alat, v'lo olat kol b'Yom Tov. Not like that, if it's Erev Yom Tov, you have extra pieces of sacrifice left over from Erev Yom Tif, so you can't burn them on Leil Yom Tif. Arba Asar shechal liot b'Shabbat, and when the 14th of Nisan is on Shabbos, so now everything's been upgraded to Shabbos. Ma'aktirin chavei psachim b'Leil Yom Tov. Then you could burn the chavei psachim, leftover pieces of the korban pesach that need to be burned, which would be, I guess, just the entrails, because the limbs are eaten. You eat the meat off the limbs. That you could burn that the night of Yom Tif. Those have a din of Shabbos. They were originally sacrificed on Shabbos. So that which is offered on Shabbos can be offered on Motzei Shabbos or on a Yom Tif. That follows it, except for Yom Kippur. So too, any piece of korban pesach which had been slaughtered on Shabbos can be burned the subsequent night of Yom Tif, because Shabbos is holier than Yom Tov. Okay, so we'll close it. Oh, you have a question? Well, yeah, burials are mutter on Yom Tif one of 2 ways. If it's Yom Tif Rishon, you have Goyim do it. Shabbos and Yom Kippur, you can't even have Goyim do it. If it's Yontif Rishon, Goyim. If it's Yontif Sheni, even Jews do it. It overrides burial of the dead on Yontif Sheni, even Yontif Sheni of Rosh Hashanah, which is Yom HaArichta, assuming definitely in Chutz La'aretz, and assuming you're one of those types who does Yontif Sheni of Rosh Hashanah in Eretz Yisrael, which is kind of strange when you think about it. If you have such a case of a Yontif Sheni or Eretz Yisrael or anywhere, the burial is done by Jewish people. It overrides it. They do the whole thing. Matter of fact, my uncle testified, even in Montreal until recently, they would still do that. That was the psak. Why is this changed? Why is it in New York you never find a funeral on Yontif Sheni ever again? So now we have refrigeration, so it's not. It used to be critical that you do it right away, and they even had definitely no hispedim, and they don't do any of them in hugging like you say and crying anything like that. They just bury straight. It's Yontif, so they do the minimum. A little bit more. It's even less than a funeral. Let's say Chol Moed. Okay, but you have to bury on Yontif Sheni. Okay, we close with the prayer that we never have to see these things ever again. Shalom. We need Sachon. Have a good Shabbos and a good month. Thank you. Be good.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.